Dr. Naveen Rai Tulli has a question for Professor Wasim, that any special campaigns of vector surveillance at workplaces and criteria for selecting 12 houses in a radius. This was from another attendee too, that why the 12 houses? Dr. Wasim.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Actually, our vector control or surveillance program is not like a campaign. It's a regular feature that starts with starts uninterrupted. We keep on surveying the breeding spots throughout the year, and we have special teams. One is set for the indoor surveillance, and the second one is set for the outdoor surveillance. So these teams move in their own domains and ultimately keep on collecting the mosquito population. As far as the 12 houses criteria on each side, which makes up 48 houses and including one house of the patient, 49 houses. Why we have done this? Because most of the houses or places from where we have been, collecting the mosquitoes, the houses are placed very close to one another. And we have seen that if one house gets positive with the mosquito population, we see three or four, five, six houses in straight line that are positive with the mosquito population. So to be on the safe side, we have used this number that is ultimately, that minimizes the further, spread of the mosquito population. And this number is doable because we have plenty of teams that are working in the field, and we have given one team 25 houses, target. So that team ultimately goes and cleans up the entire situation, and it's almost good. And the other important thing about the indices, of course, we are using this criteria. We are using the breeder index, we are using the house index, and we are using the container index. If the BI is less than 3% or is more than 3%, is even more than 10%, the basic criteria is the surveillance, that we are doing the surveillance irrespective of the BI, or in case if a particular area has more vector population. So over there we just set up the thematic style of source elimination mode, and ultimately we put more engaged, more number of people. They will go over there and ultimately clear all the breeding places. So this is what we are doing. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. And how much is the impact of cryptic breeding sites, built environment, and waste management having within Pakistan? Dr. Wasim again.
Yes, yeah. Oh, beg your pardon, please.
What is the impact of cryptic breeding sites, built environment, and waste management within Pakistan as far as dengue is concerned?
The waste management, and I said in my talk that all these areas where we are, dumping the solid waste, where we are, just throwing the, garbage in open areas, all the potential breeding site. And once it's in the monsoon season, you have plenty of mosquito breeding pockets. So that's very important, that if you are to minimize the vector, population, you have to go for these areas. You have to address these areas.
Okay, thank you. There was one question about the long-term use of capturing the data in the dengue patients for Captain Usman.
Yes, I think I've answered the question. As long as we are concerned right now, we do not have a follow-up mechanism with the patients. We do have a feedback mechanism with the patients. And in that, when a patient gets discharged, he or she is required or kind of volunteered to fill a form where he or she shares the experience that they have had in the hospital with us. Plus, they can also tell us whether case response has taken place on their workplace as well as their home address or not. So that kinds of tells us how our teams are performing in the field. As regards the side effects or long-term effects of dengue patients, I would in fact request Dr. Somia to tell us if there are any effects on the health outcomes of dengue patients.
Okay, actually the dengue is an acute febrile illness. It's an acute viral illness with no documenting long-term sequelae, but we do know that if there is a serotype switch, then there are more chances of going into a DHF in the secondary infections as compared to the primary infection. So though we do not have a follow-up of these dengue patients on long-term basis, but we do have the data in the system. And if a similar patient reports next year or in the subsequent years with symptoms of dengue, then we can retrieve the data by having an NIC or an MR code, which is patient specific. So whenever we enter the data with the same particular, same name and CMNIC, we can see that this patient reported in 2018 or 17, and then we can retrieve all the data. So since there are no long-term complications and it's not a chronic illness, we do not follow up these patients after their discharge, but we can retrieve the data if needed. Okay, another question from Dr. Wasim again. Dr. Wasim, there are a lot of questions related to you. This is from one of the panelists, I guess, who wants to know from Basil. Okay, what are you think of the pupae-based indices rather than Bretu index?
Yeah, it's very good. And Dr. Somia, if you remember that in the international conference, I pointed out over there that we need to have 4 different type of indices. One is Breto, house, container, and the pupil index. Pupae basically are true indicators that what is the number of population that ultimately has escaped from that area. So that is very important.
Okay. Dr. Jamshed, the question for you that how do you see the role of World Health Organization in chipping into this Punjab provincial dengue control program on a national level or a provincial level?
Thank you, Dr. Somia. Actually, World Health Organization is already working hand in hand with the Punjab government from start since 2011, and you have in your talk also commented on that. But as a longer run, we have a discussion with the government of Punjab as well as I believe during the last visit of Dr. Mahipala, the head of WHO mission in Pakistan, we are thinking to have a dengue capacity buildings where the clinical management as well as the epidemiological trainings for the field staff can be routed and can be housed. So this kind of collaborating work can be, we are also working at national level with the ministry to combat on these vector-borne diseases as well as other neglected tropical diseases.
Okay, there was one question which was directed to me by Dr. Hasita Tisaya from Sri Lanka, that how much Punjab clinical management protocols have been able to influence the other provinces, and were we able to, disseminate the same protocols at a national level? So I gave my opinion that we try our best to offer help, but I would like comments from Dr. Jamshed as well, that how we can have a national consultative and a national guidelines implemented throughout the country so that we are all on one page.
Thank you, Dr. Somia. Actually, this is need of the time, because even in Punjab, before this institutionalization of DA guideline, every hospital were using their own guidelines as well as the treatment protocols that led, I believe, in the early days of this epidemic, the increase in mortalities. But we have seen over the time that even this worst ever epidemic of 2019 in Twin Cities, the mortality was reduced thanks to that better case management. And this is the lesson learned that we can use, and we can advocate at national level, and we can have a national dialogue, maybe led by Punjab and supported by WHO at the national level, involving all the provinces as well as the stakeholders. And we can also invite the international our experts to join us, whatever mean they can, so that at national level we can have a single national guideline based upon the experience that we have had over the year, as well as the international knowledge that can be contributed into that national guideline.
Hopefully soon. Okay, I see a raised hand from Ong Zhao from the panelists. If he can switch on the mic and ask his question. Can the support team please switch on the mic for Ong Zo Wu? I see a raised hand.
Dr. Somia, there was a question from somebody about the larviciding. Do you want me to answer? Or
Gigi, if you haven't answered, if I missed it, please do.
Yeah. So there was a question about the larviciding. Actually, I said earlier that we are using WHO-approved insecticides. So we have the product that we are using against the larvae are two types. One is Temifos 1G and the second one is Temifos 50 EC. 1G is basically used at a time when you see that the mosquito population, that is the instars, first, second, and third instars are there. But in case if the ponding area contains mosquitoes of fourth and pupal stage, then you have to have early kill of these two stages. And the best option with you to have early kill for these is Temifos 50 EC. So if you spray this Temifos 50 EC on the surface of water, this will give you early kill, and then you can go on with the Temifos 1G. So that's all for this. Thank you.
Okay, Captain Osman, I wanted to ask you, because you have already answered it, but for the information of all the other attendees as well, that do you think that these critical interventions in technology are cost effective, and how will you take them long term?
Obviously, these are cost effective. I mean, there's no amount of money can actually compare saving lives. So this technology intervention that we're doing in Punjab involves a lot of workforce using mobile applications and mobiles, and a system integrated through dashboards and computers and hardware to remain connected. But whatever the cost that goes into it eventually helps us saving lives. So I think, and not only that, we're also gathering a huge set of data for over the years comparison. I mean, now we can tell how much surveillance happened in the year 2019 and how much surveillance happened in the year 2020, and what were those areas that were reporting patients, and what were those areas that were reporting larvas, and more larvas or less larva areas. So you have a huge set of data that you can compare over the years to maybe enter into a lot of studies, and you can use this data set to improve the overall surveillance methodologies in the region. So
and there is another question, that how do you encourage and motivate your people to use these apps?
I mean, since these applications are very user friendly, they aren't much English or Urdu written onto them. These are very user friendly icons with clear symbols onto them. I mean, if there was a mosque that we wanted to refer, the mosque is not written over there. Actually, it's the figure of a mosque or the shape of a mosque. So if you want to mention a mosquito, there's the shape of this mosquito as an icon on that application. So it's a very, very easy to use application. Besides, all of these employees, all of these people that use these applications are through the government departments, are from the government departments. They're kind of they are made to do this through our SOPs and our guidelines. So it's a compulsion onto them to do it. And then, as I told you, there were different platforms that reviewed their performance every day. A Turk meeting, a meeting that happens at the town level, or every week, a meeting that happens at the district level, which is the District Emergency Response Committee meeting, reviews how many users have used a particular application. And one of the most interesting features of our review is that how many people were dormant in a particular set of time. I mean, for instance, if today we were holding a cabinet committee meeting, we would review that 3 days prior to our meeting, how many % people were dormant and were not using that application. So there is a threshold that we have allowed to everyone. I mean, like for instance, in a low transmission season, our threshold is about 30%. So on a given day, 30% people could be resting or not doing surveillance activities. But when there is epidemic and when there is onset of season, the allowance reduces to about 20%. So we also check how many people are dormant and how many people are doing work. So that's one way of not only encouraging, but also ensuring that majority of the people are using this application. Besides, I've also written a text reply to the question that we also engage seasonal workers on account of dengue surveillance when the time comes. So we have additional workforce doing this for us as well.
Okay, I think with this we will wrap our today's session because we are over time now. I would just like to give my message to everybody who is part of this forum that dengue is a disease which kills. It is a disease which maims. It is a disease with no effective vaccine, and it is a disease with no antiviral therapy. So it's a great threat to all age groups, to both the genders, to our health and to our economy. And we all must raise our voice to dedicate and advocate a World Dengue Day. So we have started this campaign. I would like to re-emphasize on the importance of creating awareness and consolidating our efforts by putting in a label of a World Dengue Day to 15th of June, so that the world realizes that this is a biggest threat to the mankind, the mosquito and the disease that it causes in the form of dengue is real. The threat is real. So we need to raise our voice and create awareness about this deadly disease. And let's all join hands together. Please sign the petition at change.org and join our movement of raising a voice for dedicating a World Dengue Day. Wishing you all a very good evening and good night in some parts of the country, some parts of the world. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us in this session. I hope that this decade of learning in Pakistan, which we shared with you today, was useful, and it will be adding to some of the existing information about Pakistan Dengue Control Program that you had. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Dr.
much.
Soumya. Assalamu alaikum.